Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Madam Vice President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor and a pleasure to be before you again. This is my third presentation to the Human Rights Council. And in this particular case, I will be presenting 3 reports. The first is on a thematic report on fiscal legitimacy and its implications for human rights. It may sound a little dense, but hopefully I will make it a little light. And in addition to that, 2 country reports, one on Liechtenstein, which I can now pronounce correctly, I hope, and the Bahamas. So there have been a series of problems covering the world over the past few years. We've come out of the COVID crisis, and we're now going through issues around money, limitations to the amount of financial resources that states have. And it is in line with that, while reflecting on global changes. We have a deadlock in the negotiations around the climate treaty. We have a deadlock in the negotiations on the pandemic treaty. We have a General Assembly resolution looking into a multilateral tax convention. Now, all of these spaces are all engaging with the issue around financing and around issues of creation of new bodies in order to put funds together in order to achieve human rights and alleviate poverty. And it is in line with that that I decided to start with the topic of fiscal legitimacy through human rights, while looking at principles of what could be guiding it. In the issue of fiscal legitimacy, it is extremely important that financial resources come forward on a principles-based approach for the realization of human rights. This report examines the challenges faced globally within institutions, regionally, continentally, and nationally, surrounding not only the collection but also the use of financial resources aimed at raising living standards and realizing human rights not only at individual levels but also collectively. Over the past few decades, the idea of a linear model has clearly been overturned, and there is a need for financial progress to be hand in hand with not only poverty alleviation and development, as well as growth, but also by revealing numerous challenges such as inequality, climate instability, and gaps in the global financial architecture, which I have referred to already. Technological shifts, but also conflicts and wars are now making this a bigger challenge from our perspective in human rights. By adopting a human rights perspective, what becomes very important is to include the principle of progressive realization and include a duty to provide international cooperation and assistance, not simply coordination. These are very important in making sure that available resources are ensured and that there is a principle-based system guiding this. There are 7 key principles that I have elaborated upon. They include issues around transparency, accountability, and responsibility, as well as effectiveness and efficiency in use of resources, and finally, fairness and justice. States and regional blocs are invited to not only integrate these principles in their decision-making process while keeping all financial decisions focused on the realization of human rights and raising standards, but should also be taken into consideration by international institutions in their financial decision-making when it comes to a do-no-harm approach by states and state administration. I believe that these 7 principles are already being used in different ways in a lot of the treaties that are being negotiated across the world, and I think using them as a clear guideline will be extremely useful. Madam Vice President, I will now proceed to my country visit reports. I had the honor to visit not only Liechtenstein but also the Bahamas, and I thank both nations for their immense support in making these very successful visits. In my visit to Liechtenstein between the 19th and the 26th of June 2023, I would like to point out that despite being a small country, it took me about 2 hours going through it at a certain point in time. It is a thriving industrial and financial sector and is committed to human rights with memberships in major international human rights treaties. Despite challenges like a high proportion of commuters, Liechtenstein boasts a robust economy with a GDP of 6 billion Swiss francs in 2020 and have very many positive practices which I would like to encourage other member states to consider in social affairs such as remunerated home care and state-financed care and nursing allowances. However, official reports from 2020 reveal significant disparities in wealth and income distribution, with 10% of taxpayers possessing assets at least 16 times higher than the median asset, and incomes at least twice as high. Now, temporary government measures during COVID effectively mitigated the crisis impact on unemployment and financial stability. However, these disparities still persist, particularly affecting single-wage persons and single-parent households. Issues such as the absence of a minimum wage, gender wage gaps, and weak labor practices were some of the concerns that I've highlighted in the report regarding discrimination and the need for a comprehensive human rights strategy. I would like to acknowledge Liechtenstein's commendable practices in finance, technology, and law, as well as their initiatives on finance against trafficking and slavery, which does demonstrate commitment through financial services to alleviate some of the human rights concerns the world faces. I also noted great efforts by the government and the financial sector to put Ukrainian refugees in particular not only into the economy regarding their right to work, but also allowing them the possibility of opening up bank accounts. However, it still remains unclear if all the other refugee groups in the country have access to the same facility. I do think this is a very interesting idea, and I would like to commend them for it, because I believe all countries in the world should encourage access of fee-free banking for refugee populations. Now, I would like to highlight that despite a stable landscape with 11 banks, there have been concerns about an accessing to liquidity in crisis situations. It's interesting that I say this because it is Liechtenstein that we are speaking about. And it is simply a signal for me that if a country with such high net worth individuals and such a big GDP is dealing with an issue of liquidity, then clearly it really is a global issue, and we need to take liquidity concerns very seriously. As a result of which they are seeking IMF membership in order to ensure financial stability, of a very interesting initiative. My recommendations, Madam President, emphasize the crucial integration of international human rights standards into their national strategies, accompanied by clear benchmarks and dedicated budgets. In addition, while I commend the publication of the last report on poverty, there remains a question on the root causes of poverty, if they have been identified, and why they still remain in place despite the wealth of the nation. In addition, I would like to suggest that Liechtenstein consider the development of human rights indicators to assess its progress in terms of their international human rights obligations, as well as assessing global human rights impact of financial services to align with the codes of conduct of the UN guiding principles on business and human rights. And finally, I believe joining the International Labour Organization would also be extremely useful for the country in increasing ODA, as well as conducting impact assessments on digital innovations, which there are many of in the country, while bolstering civil society participation in human rights discussions. Madam Vice President, I now turn to my final report, which is on the Bahamas, where I visited between the 21st and the 31st of August 2023. Bahamas has faced serious climate-related challenges and natural disasters, and as a result of that, has had an exacerbated impact during COVID. Despite these challenges, efforts are being made to ensure human rights and freedoms with strategic integration of the Sustainable Development Goals into their national development frameworks. Also, similar to Liechtenstein, classified as a high-income country with a gross national income of $31,520 in 2022, Bahamas faces a very significant challenge in keeping this economic status. Limited access to concessional funding is exacerbating their high cost of living, together with a gross annual living wage that is required to maintain a decent standard of living that surpasses their minimum wage. And the slow economic growth, coupled with the numerous climate changes they are going through, is affecting their traditional sectors of financial services and hospitality, which is pushing back development. The country is heavily reliant on tourism and related services, alongside with property development and financial services, making them extremely vulnerable to external shocks. Natural disasters are taking the country backwards. It is very unfortunate because we all hold a joint responsibility for effects like this. They have had a successive number of hurricanes, and before they have even paid off the debt from the first hurricane, they are hit with a second hurricane. That results in an inability of the country to move forward in development and to progress because the finances taken on through debt, which is non-concessional financing, incidentally, is actually resulting in infrastructure that is under the sea while the country is still paying off the debt. It gives me great concern that this is a cycle we are now seeing in financial spaces. In my view, Bahamas is seizing with significant challenges that have been exacerbated by its high income status. And as a result, it requires tangible international cooperation and assistance that is tailored to small island development states. To the government, I recommend rebasing the country's GDP and ensuring that other socioeconomic indicators, such as the Human Development Index, Vulnerability and Multidimensional Index, such as the one recently released by UN DESA, and climate-focused indices are considered when determining the country's access to international funding, public foreign debt, and development aid. I would also recommend diversifying the economy and enhancing scrutiny of the banking system to prevent illicit financial flows. International financial institutions and states should recognize the unique vulnerabilities of countries like the Bahamas and contribute to the loss and damage fund that has been set up, which remains empty as we speak, as well as support the establishment of a global tax body to help alleviate some of this pressure, while also looking into providing concessional loans while cancelling debt related to climate-related disasters. Furthermore, I had requested that the Bahamas be removed from the European Union's tax blacklist with a clear reassessment process outlined by relevant authorities. I'm happy to announce that a week and a half ago, this already took place. In conclusion, Madam Vice President, with regards to the plans for this year and beyond, I extend my sincere gratitude to the governments of Angola for extending an invitation for a country visit in July this year, and the governments of Kuwait and Croatia for extending a visit for next year in 2025. I would also like to kindly reiterate my requests to the governments of the United States, New Zealand, Kazakhstan, and Pakistan, which are all in progress, I hope, to conduct country visits. My October report to the General Assembly is titled Fiscal Social Contract and the Human Rights Economy. Madam Vice President, distinguished delegates, by reiterating to member states that honoring financial obligations to create the space for the realization of human rights must apply not only at the national level, but also when member states act collectively within the United Nations and other multilateral forums. I would therefore like to close by saying that I would like to urge all member states to take action in regard to this liquidity crisis that not only the United Nations is currently facing, but also several other bodies across the world. In the past 1 year, which has had an extremely negative impact to the work. And I would like to commend the work of this Council thus far. I thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to your questions and comments. Madam Vice President.